Hello world, and welcome to this Fundraising Online session. I am Arco Hoendert and this is Jillian Stewart, and we are speaking from you from the wonderful city of Amsterdam, in which we are based. We are with PeerWorks Consulting, an international peer-to-peer fundraising consultancy, and we help nonprofits like you all around the world grow their community and revenue through peer-to-peer fundraising events and campaigns. Peer-to-peer is basically all we do. So you might wonder, what do you mean with peer-to-peer? Just to clarify before we go further, here's what we mean. In traditional fundraising, you, the charity, are asking your community closest to you for a donation. And what we mean with peer-to-peer fundraising, instead of asking for donations, you ask for your supporters to fundraise. And those supporters, those fundraisers, go to their networks and ask for donations on your behalf. So they're expanding your community and your revenue. So today we're going to answer this question. How can your data help you earn more revenue from your peer-to-peer event?
Yeah, and so one of our favorite authors and bloggers out there is Seth Godin, and I think many of you probably follow him as well. And ironically, he wrote a post recently about data analysis, and we love what he wrote about that. He said, when you measure the wrong thing, you get the wrong thing. You can be precise in that measurement, but precision really is not significance. Instead, when you're able to expose your work and your process to the right thing, to the metric that actually really matters, then good things happen. And I think this really helps illustrate what we're trying to do today, is to show you what those things are that you should be looking at when you're looking at your peer-to-peer event data. And when you're paying attention to those metrics, then good things can happen.
So in this class, we're going to answer these three questions. What's driving your event's revenue? How should you measure and track it? And how can you optimize these revenue drivers?
So let's start by taking a look at what's driving your event's revenue, the basic equation for how your events are making money. So this is really it. The first kind of bucket, the first area where your events make money is in registration fees. A lot of times, charities are charging a registration fee in order for participants to participate in the event. It's quite common practice. There's a lot of reasons why we love a registration fee, but one of them is that it brings early cash flow into the event. Another way that your event makes money is by fundraising revenue, by asking your participants to go out and fundraise to their networks, as Arco had mentioned. Sometimes that fundraising is just a suggestion, it's not a requirement, and for other events it is actually a requirement in order to participate. And finally, another area where your events are making money is with what we call related revenue. And what this is made up of is kind of everything else, mostly with regards to corporate sponsorship. So when you get a company to give you money towards the event as a sponsor for the event, but this can also come in the form of food and beverage sales, merchandise sales, that kind of thing. It's all the revenue that's related to producing the event. You'll notice there's a little star in the corner of this equation, and this is really important. This is kind of the exponential factor to this entire equation. It relates to the number of participants that you're recruiting to your event. The number of participants impacts all of these three other buckets. So obviously, the more participants you recruit to the event, the more you're going to earn in registration fees, the more that people are going to actually fundraise for you, and the more related revenue you'll get from food and beverage sales or from sponsors that come in when you have an event for a lot of people. So this is the basic revenue equation. This is what's really bringing in the money for your event program. But while these specific buckets, these specific revenue streams are easy to track, it's easy to see how much money you make from registration fees, easy to see how much money you get from your corporate sponsors, these don't really make for the best KPIs. These don't really tell you much if you're just looking at your data from this level. So there's a lot more going on underneath the surface of each of these that really affect the overall results. Fundraising revenue is really at the heart of this whole equation with peer-to-peer fundraising. The money that your participants are getting for you with their networks, the amount of donations they're getting. And since we only have 45 minutes for this session, we really want to take a deep dive into this particular revenue driver and break it apart and show you how to make the most out of this.
I'm going to show you a little bit more about the first two things we look at when analyzing fundraising revenue. We have two buckets, and we look at self-donations on one hand, so the donation they make to kickstart their fundraising, and on the other hand we have participant fundraising, the funds participants raise from their friends and family. So looking at self-donations, when we look at the self-donation data, we break it down in this way. On one hand, we look at the percentage of participants that self-donate, and on the other hand, we look at the average amount of that donation. With participant fundraising, we then look at the number or the percentage of fundraisers that activate as a fundraiser. So there's also a large group of people that don't fundraise if you don't have the fundraising minimum, but we're looking at the percentage that percentage of participants that activate as a fundraiser, and then also at the average amount they raise. And within this average amount, we then break that down into the average number of gifts and the average gift size.
So these are really the KPIs of your peer-to-peer fundraising event. These, the ones that we've circled, are the ones that you really should be looking at when you're looking at your data to break down the fundraising that's happening and looking at it in this way. When you start to look at these metrics, you can really start to understand what is driving your fundraising revenue. So what we suggest, if you haven't been looking at your data in this way, is that you do an assessment of your past year's data. If you've been doing the event for a while, check it out and see where you've been landing with each of these KPIs. Really establish a benchmark or start to see how you've been performing year over year. And then once you see where you're at, then you can start to see where there might be areas for improvement. And so what we're going to do now is talk about how we can help you improve each of these important KPIs. And the best way to do this is explain it the way that you would when you dangle a carrot. When you're dangling in a carrot to get people to do something, to encourage them to do something, you're kind of teasing them with something. So we consider this carrot that you're dangling when you're getting your participants to fundraise more or self-donate or whatever. We're just making this suggestion. There's the power of suggestion. That carrot is a suggestion. And I think up to this point, we see with a lot of our clients that up to this point, they may just be suggesting that people fundraise. That's it. And that's great. If you don't have a fundraising requirement for your event, maybe that's a great place to start, is to start encouraging people to fundraise. But this will only get you so far. If you can actually dangle a carrot in front of each one of these KPIs, or start to use that carrot to really influence these different KPIs, these different revenue drivers, then you can really start to, when you can crank up each one of those, then your overall fundraising revenue will grow. So we're going to talk about each one of these KPIs and how to do that. But first, before we do that, we want to talk about this whole carrot dangling exercise. So when you're dangling a carrot, if you're dangling this carrot or you're making a suggestion that's kind of too easy, it's too low, that won't be really effective. Likewise, if you're dangling the carrot too high, it's out of reach for people. If you're making a suggestion that just doesn't seem reasonable or realistic, that won't work either. The magic is when you can dangle a carrot that's a stretch, but it's within reach of your participants or of your donors. Another thing to think about is when you're making these suggestions, like how do you sweeten that deal? You're dangling a carrot, and maybe just dangling a little carrot is enough. You're just suggesting to people that they do something, to do this or try this. That can sound like, we suggest that you fundraise. We suggest that you fundraise a certain amount. Or we suggest that you self-donate, or we suggest you self-donate a certain amount. These are all just the most basic kind of suggestions or the basic kind of carrot that you could be dangling. But you can also sweeten that deal. You can make that carrot a little bit bigger or a little bit better by adding an impact statement, adding a case statement to what happens when somebody does this for you. So if you do this, then we as a charity can do this. And we're going to show you some examples of how that works. You can sweeten the deal even further by what we call normalizing the situation or normalizing the suggestion. So when you can explain that other people have done this for you, that makes it feel like, well, then they can do that too. So others like you have done this, so you can as well. And the last thing to really sweeten the deal, to really make the best suggestion ever, is to, and this isn't even a real word, but I love the word, is incentivize. If you can add an incentive to the suggestion. So when you do this, you will earn this, to give a reward or make these participants feel special by, every time they get a donation or when they raise a certain amount of money, that can really help quite a bit. So in the end, when you're dangling these different carrots, doesn't matter what level you're doing at, the more, the greater, and the better the carrot that you're dangling, the bigger the pot of gold is at the end of that. So now that we've talked about what the carrots are, what you can dangle and within reach, doing something that's reasonable and realistic, now we'll look at each one of these KPIs and show you what kinds of programs, what kinds of things you can do to help you increase each of these things that you're tracking in your data. Oh.
To get this enormous
big pot of gold.
Big pot of gold. Yeah. So let's look at the first kind of revenue or KPI, revenue driver that we mentioned. This is the percentage that self-donate. If your peer-to-peer platform doesn't allow this, you can also simply include a suggestion to self-donate in your emails and to your participants. But what we see here on the slide is a pop-up where for the Sclerosevereniging, they have the Femina race. It's a women's race in Denmark, and before the fundraisers and the participants for the first time get to their fundraising page, they get this screen, and it's basically an ask for a donation. So they say, give a gift to yourself first so you can kickstart your fundraising, and so you already have something on your account, and it also just looks good if you already do it to yourself. And then for the second data we track, the average amount of that self-donation, we find the donation form of Macmillan really, really good. They have this donation form in which they added an impact statement right in the green. And then what is also interesting to look at as a second point is that they added a £19 amount in that mix as well. And this is possible that they did some data crunching to push that gap between the 10 and the 25 pounds a little closer, so it's more appealing to also make a donation in between.
Yeah, it's almost as if that 25 amount was too far away from the people that were giving 10 pounds, and so they dangled a 19 pound amount, and it's interesting to see. I'd love to look at their data and see how many people now are giving €19 instead of just 10. Great, so that was self-donations. That was one part of that fundraising kind of equation. Another big part that affects overall fundraising revenue is the percentage of people that actually activate as fundraisers, the ones that actually start fundraising, especially for those events where fundraising isn't required. We want to show you an example of a project we're working on for our client Pieta House. It's an Irish charity that focuses on suicide and self-harm prevention. And their event that they do every year on May 7th is called Darkness into Light. It's an event with over 130,000 participants. And this year is the first year that they've really added fundraising as part of the participation, that they're really actually encouraging fundraising. So this is brand new to this participant base, 100,000 people that are used to just paying a registration fee to participate in the event, and now Pieta House is asking them to fundraise. Because that's new, they need to make the suggestion, and so we're showing you a sample of a Facebook post that they posted recently where they're explaining fundraising, and I'll read an excerpt from it where it says, while your participation in Darkness into Light raises awareness, it's your fundraising efforts that will enable us to continue to provide the life-saving support for everyone that walks through our doors. So that's just the suggestion that they're making. They're saying, hey, it'd be great if you went to the next level and fundraised. But in addition to that, because fundraising is new, they also decided to offer a small incentive to those that started fundraising. So you'll notice there's this button, this fundraising star badge, and it's a glow-in-the-dark badge that they're giving to everybody that just gets one donation, any amount, just to get them to start fundraising. And those fundraisers will wear them on the event, and then other people will see, other participants that haven't tried fundraising, they'll get to see that that other people have, and hopefully that will inspire them to try it maybe next year. So this is one way that you can get more people to start activating as fundraisers, especially if your event doesn't require fundraising yet. And then we wanted to show you what happened after a few weeks of implementing this strategy for Pieta House and for Darkness into Light. We had several people start fundraising, and we wanted to start telling that story to the participants. So this is a snapshot of one of the emails that was sent out to the participant base, and in it, the very first sentence, it says, "Just last week, hundreds of Darkness into Light participants took the extra step and started fundraising for Pieta House. Together, they raised over €20,000 in just 1 week." This is what we were talking about, normalization. When those that are reading this haven't started fundraising and they might be nervous about fundraising, when they start to see that hundreds of other people like them just started doing that and were successful doing that, we think that that can really help them start activating as fundraisers. So something else to look at is not just the amount of people that activate as fundraisers, but looking at the average amount that those people are raising. And we love to use an example from the US. It's an event that I actually worked on for several years there for the Susan G. Komen Foundation. It's called the Breast Cancer 3-Day event. And this event it's a 3-day, 60-mile walk that in order to participate, the participants need to fundraise a minimum of $2,300. So it's a significant amount of fundraising they're doing just to be able to come to the event. But what they did and what we put together several years ago was a program that's called the Legacy Program. And these are all these little circles that you see are actually legacy pins, or what they call legacy pins. And you'll notice the woman wearing a lanyard, her event badge, with some of these pins attached to it. And kind of the magic of this program is that it encourages, you can earn a pin for a lot of different things, and we're showing you a selection of the pins that are earned through the program. But the green pins that you see are the pins that people can earn when they raise above and beyond the $2,300 requirement. So you'll notice there's a pin at $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. So if somebody raises $20,000 in 1 year, they get to wear that $20,000 pin. You also see a series of white pins that were added. This event has been going on for several years, and there are participants that have raised actually over $250,000 for this event. And so they're started to give lifetime achievement pins at those certain levels. So very special pins. These things cost like pennies on the dollar. But it's amazing to see when we were working at these events to watch people line up and wait in line to get their pin because they were so excited to wear it. And we started to see when we ran the data on this event to see that when we introduced the Legacy Pin program, a lot of the fundraising started to cluster around these amounts at these certain milestones or incentive levels that we had established with the pins. So we can look at the average amount that's raised by our participants and break that down even further and look at the data around the average amount of gifts that those fundraisers are getting, the average number of donations that they get, and also the amount of money that each of those donors are giving when they give. So we'll first look at the average number of gifts and what we can do to influence that number. Going back to the example of Pieta House and the Darkness into Light event, we added these social share graphics to the collection of fundraising tools that we give to the participants. And these two graphics really help drive participants and drive donors to give more money or give more gifts. So you'll see that one of them says, help me raise 5 donations today, and the other one says, help me raise 10 donations this week. We're not focusing on how much those donations are, but we're just focusing on increasing the quantity of the gifts that are given to each fundraiser. And then looking at the average gift size, the amount that's given when somebody comes to make a donation. A good example to look at is from an event that I worked on in the States called the Race for the Cure. It's a 5K run-walk event in Washington, D.C. And when we look at their donation form, so when someone goes to donate to one of these participants, you'll notice that the amounts there, there are some suggested amounts there. And in the past, those suggested amounts said just very $25, $50, $100, just very basic. If you just come up with an amount out of your head, you usually come up with those amounts. They're pretty standard amounts. But what we looked at when we went back, this was years ago, looking at the data and looking at the donation data that was coming in, it was hundreds of thousands of donations that came in for a total of about $4 million overall in a given year. So it's a lot of money that's coming in from these individual donations. And when we looked at that, we noticed that everybody was giving around these same kind of standard amounts. So we thought, what would happen if we increased the suggested amount, increased what we were asking people to give just by a little bit, and bump every donation up by a couple dollars, and what would happen to the revenue? So the $25 amount became $30, the $50 amount became $60, and eventually the $100 amount became $110. And just by that one change alone, it significantly increased the revenue for the event that year. Arco is going to also talk about an event that here in the Netherlands and the donations that came in for that.
Yeah, when I was working on the Run for Kika, we noticed that adding the impact statement helped, but also that there was a significant difference in the amount of what people that work for a company donate and the people that just donate for themselves. As you can see in this slide, you can tick that box. It says, I want to donate as a company or on behalf of a company. And when you tick that, the amounts all go up in relation to what a company is able to spend and versus what a person is able to spend. So by doing this and varying those suggestions, it really helps bump the average donation amount and the average gift size.
Great. So one more way that we can really influence the average amount that's raised by participants is actually looking at the fundraising goal, the goals that these participants are setting for themselves. This has a really big influence in the total amount that they're raising. So to do this, we're going to go back to the example in Denmark for the Femina race and the Scleroseforeningen, the MS Society there. And we did a little data analysis on this event, looking at the amount of money that their participants were raising for them. The required fundraising amount for this event, in order for a participant to race in the Femina race, they had to raise a minimum of 300 Danish krone. So on the far left of this graph, the first bar, you'll see the tallest one there. That's the number of people that raised the minimum amount, that 300 krone amount. As you look across, you'll see then the distribution of how much people raised all the way up to, I think the upper was over 3,000 krone. And that's the distribution of the number of people that raised the different amounts above 300, the minimum. And so you'll see in the far right, that dark arrow, that's showing you where their default fundraising goal was set. So they were suggesting that people fundraise 3,000 krone. So while the required minimum was 300, they were suggesting that people fundraise 3,000 krone. And I literally have a carrot here, but that's when you have the carrot that's way out of reach of people. It's not within reach when the minimum is 300. So it's far, far out. And so we did this histogram of the amount that people were actually raising, and even looked at the amount that people were setting their fundraising goals at. If the suggested goal was at 3,000, when we looked at what people were actually changing their goals to, that average was around 758 krone. So much, much less than 3,000. They basically were telling us that 3,000 was way, way, way too high. So their goals they were setting around 758, and the actual average fundraising amount was about just over 1,000 krone. It was 1,043 krone. So they're actually performing over 1,000 krone. So we wanted to kind of narrow the gap between what they're actually performing at, was that 1,043, and that goal, the suggested goal, which was at 3,000. And what we had recommended to the Scleroseforeningen is that they lower their suggested fundraising goal to 1,500 krone. So that's that gold arrow that you see. And when they switch and move that, when they move that suggested goal, we think that more people are going to see that that's within reach. It's dangling that carrot within a reach for people. It's just a little bit of a stretch to get there, not completely out of range for them. So we just looked really at the most simple way to look at your data, the most basic data that's available, pretty much regardless of the peer-to-peer platform that you have that you're running your event on. I think all of the data that we've mentioned is available to you and quite easy to calculate. There's obviously a lot more that you can do when diving into your data, and a lot more insights that you can find. And we just made a little list here of what you can look at. With recruitment, there's a lot you can look at with helping to increase the total number of people that you're recruiting to the event. You can check out the average team size. If you have a team event, how many people are recruited to those teams? And you can provide incentives or just suggest that people to recruit a team of more than 10 people, let's say. You can also look at the retention rate of the participants. How many are coming back year over year? And do you provide an incentive for people to repeat year after year? There's also a whole lot you can do just looking at the fundraising performance based on the different types of registration. So looking at fundraising of new participants versus those that are repeats, looking at team fundraising performance versus individuals, adults versus kids even, survivors versus kind of regular participants. And another category a lot of times we look at is fundraising performance based on other things such as when did they register? Did the people that registered really early, did they fundraise more than the people that registered close to the event? Did the people that have a closer connection to the cause fundraise more or less than the people that don't? Or maybe your fundraising results vary based on the location of the event, if you have an event happening in multiple locations. And finally, you can look really close at the donation performance. As Arco mentioned, there's that looking at your private donations versus corporate donations, what was done on the Run for Kika. And also look at donation amounts when people give to a team versus giving to an individual. That can also be interesting. So we were just kind of scratching the surface with the data analysis. There's a lot more you can look at, but of course time is limited. And but hopefully some of these things might inspire some future data crunching for you and your team. So going back to what Seth Godin had said in his blog just recently, what you measure usually gets paid attention to. What you pay attention to usually gets better. So we hope that we've shown you the things that you should be paying attention to, and when you do pay attention to those metrics and you do look at that data in that way, that all of those things will get better.
Yeah. So when you close down your computer in a bit, we want to, or we hope that you got this little funny looking rabbit that is not really that interested and doesn't really care about the carrot, just reach for it, that changes into a really big happy carrot, or like a big happy,
happy bunny
with a big carrot running away from your event, and that eventually you will be the one with the enormous pot of gold. So we're closing down, we're wrapping it up, and we would like to thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and please, if you want to hear anything more about peer-to-peer fundraising or what we are doing, we have a blog that we try to post as much as possible, hopefully, or most of the times it's once every 2 weeks. We also are going to be speaking at the IFC, so from the Renaissance Alliance, if you're able to make it, it's a really great conference. And within this presentation, we featured a couple organizations from Denmark, the UK, Ireland, the USA, and the Netherlands, and below you see the links. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask in your chat or to send us an email. Thank you.
Thank you.